All right, so I was going to make a video on this subject at some point anyway, but I think this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Because I'm really curious what you think that common sense accomplishes that education doesn't. Can it build a bridge? Can you engineer a bridge with common sense, or do you need, math and engineering skills that you learned through a progression of education in school? Now, this was actually a response to a video that I made where I said you cannot argue with profoundly ignorant people because they lack the basic concepts to understand higher concepts. That's why we educate in a gradient level where you start with very basic concepts and then you learn more advanced concepts, like the way you learn your numbers and then you learn to add them and then you learn like multiplication and division, because you can't understand those without first learning how to add and subtract, and before that learning how to count. At no point actually in this video did I mention higher education specifically. That's an assumption that this person made on their own. But even given their premise, do you when you get sick, do you take medicine that was made by doctors and scientists who studied for years to understand how to make that medicine? Or do you just take a big pill of common sense? Like when you fly in a plane, do you want that pilot to have, studied how to fly a plane? Or do you want him to just come in off the street and get in the pilot's seat and be like, it's common sense? Does that make you feel safe? Would that make you feel safe? I'm just asking. So my point in the video was that when you try to discuss advanced topics like politics, economics, social dynamics with people who have a very basic level of education, I made it very clear in this video that I'm not calling those people stupid. I'm saying people who lack education. Donald Trump said he loves the poorly educated. The poorly educated love him. So I wasn't saying any of this to look down on this person, but this is a very common, or anybody, but this is a very common response. If you talk about the necessity for education in order to understand advanced concepts, like let's say medicine or how to build a bridge or, economic policy, and you come in and you say like common sense, that's nonsensical. And really, common sense is one of those nonsense phrases that people use when they want to shut down an argument or a conversation or shut you down from asking questions without actually having to provide any evidence or rationale. They say, common sense. Everybody knows, obviously, but none of those are actual reasons, nor are they actually true. Usually when people say common sense, it's literally because they're arguing for something that they don't have any sensical rationale for. But this idea, and this, in fact, inherent hostility towards education and the educated is a serious problem in our society. We've come to a point in our society where rather than revering educators like teachers and professors and people like that as people who are benefiting the youth, benefiting society, we've been told that they hate us, that they think that they're better than us. And we've been told that by people, oddly enough, many of whom are very rich and powerful. And I find that odd. So your local librarian or your local teacher is a threat. The professor down at the college is a threat because supposedly they think that they're better than you because they're educated. But Elon Musk, like RFK, Donald Trump, these guys, they're your friends. Yeah, okay. Because you see, it's very convenient for people in power, and I admit the Democrats have been guilty of this too to some degree, but the Republicans, and especially Donald Trump, have perfected this thing of generating hostility towards education and the educated. And it's very convenient for them because, of course, an uneducated populace is easy to brainwash and control. So, one way to ensure that the populace remains uneducated is to engender hostility towards the educated in the entire education process. Hostility, suspicion, and fear about it. And this is something that you actually see in a lot of fascist regimes, authoritarian takeovers, and so forth, is that in the ramp up in the early days, there is an incredible amount of hostility towards institutes of education, whether it be grade school, high school, college, or whatever the equivalent is in the country we're talking about, especially higher education. People are told that those people are lying to them. You see this in 1920s and 30s Germany. You see this in Pol Pot's brutal regime, where they executed anyone who wore glasses because they were viewed as being of the intellectual class, who were enemies of the people and the state, according to them. You see this in the People's Revolution in China, where anyone who was an intellectual, a professor, a teacher, sometimes anybody who could read, was educated and viewed as being a traitor, someone who was lying to the youth and trying to mislead them. It gets pretty brutal in its most extreme form. And that is the path that we've gone down. And it inevitably leads to the place that we are now with someone like Donald Trump as president. Literally the stupidest, loudest person in any room is now president. And that's how you get the Trump regime.